In today's session we have two guest speakers from the Centre of Ecology and Hydrology, known as CEH, who provide the mapping data in Environment Digimap. Dr. Clare Rowland will present on CEH land cover map, then Emily Upcott will present on crop maps. After each presentation, Clare and Emily will answer questions.
So I'm going to go through quite a few things very briefly, just to give you a kind of flavour of the data set, but also to explain how we create the data sets, because I think it's useful if you understand how a data set's created before you use it. And then also the kinds of uses people have used the land cover map data for. And then I'm going to go into the land cover change data set, which is a new data set that we released for the first time last year. So what is a land cover map? A land cover map is basically a data set that tells you where what land cover you got at a particular location. For the UK land cover map, we have 21 classes. So we have some woodland classes, we have an arable class, we have a range of grassland classes, we've got some upland classes, we've got coastal classes, and then we've got urban and suburban. So that's basically what the land cover data set is. And we make it from satellite data. So satellites acquire the data. We then do various bits of pre-processing to the data. And we also create a set of training data. And the training data basically tells our classification algorithm what the land cover is at a particular location. And that means that the classification algorithm can learn basically what a color in the satellite image means in terms of land cover. So this then is the final land cover data set. So we're not actually looking at each location across the UK and working out what the land cover is. What we're doing is using satellite data and training an algorithm to identify the land cover type. And this is why sometimes we might get the land cover wrong in ways that would seem strange to a human, but they're actually because to the algorithm, the spectral characteristics of the satellite data might look similar. So sometimes we confuse arable and urban areas, which to a human interpreter look very, very different, but can look the same to the classification algorithm. But once you've got your land cover map, there's a variety of ways you can use it. So the simplest way is if you just want to compare two catchments or two counties, and you want to compare how similar they are or how different they are because of their land cover. So that's probably the simplest way that you can use a land cover data set. But there's a lot of other ways that you can use the data sets as well. And a lot of people, so ecologists and hydrologists, might have some relationship between a particular land cover type and some property. So hydrologists might take the land cover map and they might know that urban water doesn't run off from it, or no, sorry, water does run off from urban areas. It doesn't run off quite as well from suburban areas, and it soaks into the ground in arable or grassland areas. So they can take that data and the land cover map and combine the two to produce models of how water percolates through the landscape. So that's one of the common ways that people use the data. So they know what happens if you've got a particular land cover type with their data. So whether they're ecologists, it might be they know the biodiversity of different types of land cover. For hydrologists, it might be that they know the hydrological properties of the different types of land cover. So you can take that knowledge, combine it with our data and produce a new map or a new data set. Our data is also frequently used as input to models as well. And on this slide, I've just got a couple of examples of media coverage of some of the uses of the land cover map. So this first example here, 9/10 of England's floodplains not fit for purpose. What they did here was they knew where the floodplains were, and then they used their knowledge of where the floodplains were to look at the land cover types in the floodplains, and then work out what was good for floodplains and which land cover types were poor for floodplains. This urbanization example looked at the change between two land cover maps, and looked at areas where urbanization had increased, and then looked at what had been lost and the ecosystem services of the areas that had been lost. And I like this slide because it's one of those rare slides where someone uses a slide from the Daily Mail in a science presentation. And in this study here, what they did was they took the land cover map and grassland areas and basically produced maps of hay fever risk from the data. We've got a range of land cover maps. The first land cover map was LCM 1990 that was produced originally in the early 1990s. Because we're now starting to map change. Last year, we actually released a new version of Land Cover Map 1990. So you'll see here it says Land Cover Map 1990 version 2. And we can use this to look at change between 2015. One thing that's important to note about the land cover maps at the moment is that the current version of Land Cover Map 2000 and Land Cover Map 2007 have different land cover classes and different spatial structures. This means that we can't use those for change at the moment, but we are doing work now where we're producing new land cover maps between Land Cover Map 1990 and Land Cover Map 2015. So we're expecting our ability to measure change to increase over the next couple of years. So anyway, so our land cover change product. We've been mapping land cover change, well, we've been mapping land cover since the early 1990s, but a lot of people are interested in land cover change. We couldn't map land cover change for quite a long time because our products weren't consistent enough. And if you look at the land cover maps through the 1990s and up to Land Cover Map 2015, in fact, you can see that the land cover products change as new methods were developed. So Land Cover Map 1990 was a pixel-based classification. In Land Cover Map 2000, we had something called a segment-based classification where we broke the UK up into segments that looked the same in the satellite data. We found that users didn't like that very much. So in Land Cover Map 2007, we developed a new spatial structure which is based on a simplified version of OS Master Map. And that means that our polygons that we map across the landscape, a field looks like a field, a patch of woodland the shape of it looks like the patch of woodland. So that's been much more successful, and it's a lot easier to relate to other data sets as well. So the land cover maps are now mapped in a consistent way, which means that we can start looking at change. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the limitations with mapping change was the consistency between the land cover maps. There are still issues, and there's still issues with how accurately we can classify land cover. So for our change data set at the moment, what we're doing is we take our full land cover map, which has 21 classes, and convert that to 6 simplified classes. So woodland, arable, grassland, water, urban, and another class, which is mainly coastal. And then we do that for 1990 and 2015, and then produce a map of change between the two. So the white areas here are areas that have changed. It looks like there's a lot of change, but actually quite a lot of this change is just the churn that you get in agricultural areas between arable and grassland. And with the land cover product, we can look at the land cover that was there and that has been lost, and the land cover that we've gained. So what the land cover was and what it's changed into. And this is an example around Milton Keynes. There's no real reason for choosing Milton Keynes apart from the fact it was one of the very kind of early areas that we'd got finished for Land Cover Map 1990, and it was used for a prototype change product. But actually, it shows the change quite nicely. So this is basically what the land cover map was in 1990. So where it's white, things haven't changed. Where there is a colour, the colour shows what it is in 1990. And if I move to the next slide, we'll see what it's changed to in 2015. And this is one of the things that the land cover change dataset gives us. It gives us both what it was and what it changes to. So we can see what those transitions are and what those flows are from one land cover type to another land cover type. And you can see in 2015, we've got a lot of this grey colour appearing. This is as Milton Keynes is expanded between 1990 and 2015. You can also see that there are some new water bodies as well around here. So from the land cover change dataset, we can produce statistics about the net land cover change, but because it's a spatial, well, actually, I'll move on to the spatial bit in a minute. But it's better to look at those statistics in I suppose, a pictorial form. So at the launch of the land cover map 2015, so in the launch of the land cover change dataset, we did have a set of infographics that we produced to show the key changes. So you can see here that we've got this big increase in woodland. This is for GB. We've got an increase in urban. We've got a slight decrease in arable area. But the thing that has changed most significantly is this massive decrease in grassland. And we'll come back to that as we look through the slides. So we've got the same kind of data for England. And what we see for England is actually the urban increase is more pronounced. We've got less new woodland. Arable, interestingly, stays almost the same between 1990 and 2015 across England. And again, we've got this big decrease in grassland area. Because it's a spatial data set, we can look at the data spatially. So this shows the spatial trends in grassland. So the areas that are red have the biggest reductions, and the areas that are green actually have slight increases. So we see slight increases in Norfolk and some bits of Northern Ireland. But overall, we have this big reduction of almost 2 million acres. Which is greater than the size of Suffolk and Sussex combined. And this kind of loss of grassland between 1990 and 2015 is probably the kind of the big change. We see increases of woodland, most significantly in Scotland, and these are big coniferous plantations in Scotland, but we do get increases across most counties across England and Northern Ireland. We've got the change in arable as well. So this is mainly a slight decrease in Norfolk and Lincolnshire, and an increase sort of down in Cornwall and Devon. And one of the things that we're hoping is when we have more time points between 1990 and 2015 is we'll be able to separate out what is the standard churn that you get between grassland and arable because of rotation or farming, and what is actually a more significant trend with kind of farms actually becoming arable when maybe they were grassland before. We also see a slight increase in water. So this is some new reservoirs and also farmers increasingly having kind of small water bodies on their land. And also particularly around places like Milton Keynes, which we looked at before, but also around Swindon and Peterborough, these new towns quite often have gravel pits on their outskirts. And those have been converted to new recreational lakes for boating and things like that. Probably unsurprising to anybody, we do see a big increase in urban. Kent is the county that increases in urban most significantly, with 136 kilometres, and that's probably because of its location between Europe and also between London. We can look at the flows between the different types of land cover, so we can see what we're losing and what it becomes. So I mentioned the arable grassland rotation. So we see that here with some of this grassland. So this shows what was grassland in 1990 here. And this bit here was grassland and becomes arable in 2015. And likewise, this stuff that was arable in 1990 becomes grassland in 2015. We had to produce a new data set structure. And so if you're interested in using the data, basically we distribute the land cover change data set as a 5-band raster. Band 1 is the simplified classes in 1990. So that's up here. Band 2 is the simplified classes in 2015. Band 3 gives a binary change or no change layer. And then D shows what it was, what the land cover type was before the change, and E shows what the land cover type was after the change. And we're hoping that this gives most people the kind of data that they would want. So in summary, We've got a new land cover change data set. This joins the previous land cover map data sets that we've got. Our land cover change data set shows the spatial patterns of land cover change. It shows an increase of woodland, an increase in urban. It shows the kind of big pressure on grassland that we've had between 1990 to 2015 with this almost 2 million acres of reduced grassland. And it shows that grassland has been converted to woodland, arable and urban. So that's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Claire. That's fascinating. There's a lot of stuff there. Yes, we do have some questions. We've got several questions. Let's see if we can get through them all. If the answers are becoming too involved, Claire, please don't hesitate to say we'll write something down just to keep things moving.
Okay, yeah.
That's okay. So our first question is about machine learning. Is machine learning used to create the land cover from the satellite images?
Yes, it is. We use an algorithm called random forest, which is quite widely used for classifying satellite imagery. And we do have a paper out on that, so people should be able to find that.
Brilliant. That's good. We'd love to have a reference to that somewhere, because I think that would be very interesting for a lot of people.
Okay, yeah.
Next question. We've got a few, so we'll see if we can rattle through them quite quickly. Is this similar to mosaic mapping? I'm not quite sure I understand that question.
I'm not quite sure I understand it either. And one thing that what we do, or what we did with Land Cover Map 2015 and the Land Cover Map 1990, was we produced lots of individual classifications and then we mosaic them together. So I don't know whether they're referring to that.
Okay, if that doesn't answer the question that our attendant has answered, could you give us a bit more detail about what you're trying to find out, and we'll see if we can answer it online. Next one, RGB or band scales. Again, that's just a question mark at that. I'm not sure I understand the context there.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Okay, we'll come back to that then. Next one, do you have any links between land cover use and the predicted increase in sea/water levels due to the melting of the ice caps? I'm interested in the impact of this predicted sea level change on agricultural land and how to mitigate that impact in the future.
We haven't done any work looking at the impact of rising sea levels on the UK and how it's going to affect land cover, but there may well be. There's a lot of academic papers where people have used land cover map to look at a wide variety of things, so it may well be that people have looked at climate change impacts on land cover and future land cover, and may have covered that.
I suspect there are a few PhDs in there with your making use of your data quite extensively.
Yes.
Next question, how can we estimate the colour change? Why is this important for our research? I'm not sure that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe I went through how we make the land cover maps a little bit too quickly. I like to kind of cover it briefly, but not in too much detail. But with the satellite data, for the old land cover maps, we used to use images from 2 points in the year. So we try and get a summer image and a winter image. So you get that difference between what the land cover looks like in the satellite data at different points in the year, because that helps us get a better classification. So we use kind of the color of the satellite image to help identify what land cover type it is. I'm not sure whether that answers that question, though. Actually, I'm not sure. I've forgotten the question now.
Yeah, I think that comes close to it. Yes, I'm sure we can dig out some more information on exactly how that's created. Let's move along swiftly. I am conscious I'm missing one or two of these, but we do have quite a lot to get through. Is the reduction in grassland because the public and industry do not see they have as much use or visual value? And do you see this changing if grassland is proved to lock up significant carbon? That sounds like a fantastic research question.
One of the things about the land cover change data set, and certainly the slides that I presented here, those, the analysis that we've done was quite quick because we had to release the data set. The funding for this work came from NERC, National Capability Funding. And so our deliverable was to produce the data set and to make it available to the wider community, which is what we've done. But it does mean we didn't do very much analysis of the land cover change data before we released it. But the idea is that now the academic community can now take that data and use it to answer kind of, the massive range of questions it can feed into. So I think over the next couple of years, we will really start to kind of understand, what it shows and what the implications are. And, there's an awful lot of questions that we can ask about it that we just don't know the answers to at the moment. And one of the things we don't know, we suspect that most of the grassland that's been lost is fairly low ecological quality grassland rather than the high biodiversity stuff. But we don't actually know that at the moment. So, there's an awful lot of unknowns, I think. But over the next couple of years, hopefully people will take the data set and use it for research, and we will know a lot more about what the impacts are of this change on the UK environment.
Yes, I'm sure there are many people who will have their own angle to take on that, and will use the data in different ways, combine it with other things.
Yeah. And that's where it becomes most powerful. It's most powerful when you can bring other data sets to it as well to do some kind of combined analysis.
Yes, of course. In answer to another question that we've got, yes, it will work. You do that in ArcGIS. You can download the data from Digimap, but yes, using something like ArcGIS or QGIS will allow you to undertake more in-depth research like that. Next question then, is there any ability to break the broad data groups into NVC classifications?
There might be. We're doing some work for BEIS at the moment. That's the Government Department for Business and Energy and Industrial Strategy or something. And for that, we're producing new land cover maps between 1990 and 2015 because they're interested in using this data to feed in to the UK greenhouse gas inventory. But one of the things that we're hoping is that when we have this denser time series, that we will be able to basically unpick the change for more detailed classes. So whether we would get exactly to the MVC classes, I don't know, because I can't remember exactly how they match the broad habitat classes that we use. But certainly our kind of expectation or hope is that over time we will be able to map a much kind of wider range of classes.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Next one, there are many types of grassland. Do you know what is being converted, e.g. conservation, intensive, rotation, extensive grasslands?
I partly answered this before. It's one of those things that we need to analyse, but it's one of those things that kind of is a lot of people's immediate question. And we suspect it's kind of agricultural improved grassland that we're losing, but we don't know that yet.
Yeah. We have one question about, next question, how much and what ground truthing do you use to check the machine learning?
That's a good question. For the stable land cover maps, we have a network of about 20,000 points that we try and update and refresh for validation. For the land cover change, it's much, much harder. Because basically there's very limited data for 1990, and there is potentially more data available for 1990, but it's in paper archives and things like that. So I think for the static land cover maps or the more recent land cover maps, we can validate them reasonably well. For the earlier ones and for the change data set, then it's much, much tougher, and we have to rely on kind of small samples of kind of manually created validation data. Yeah,
much harder thing. Lovely, that's great. I'm conscious we've skipped over a few questions, but we are pushed for time just now. We will come back to those on paper later on, so apologies if your question hasn't been read out just now. Thank you very much, Claire. That was fascinating. I'm sure we could sit here and ask questions all day because it's an amazing data set, and I hope that the folks here will enjoy using it and get some real good use out of it. Can we move on then, please? I'd like to introduce Emily again. Emily Upcott is an ecologist and a spatial modeler, and is going to talk to us about CEH's land cover crops data set, so specifically about crops. Emily, take it away. Do you want to share your screen, and we'll take some questions later?
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
Right, I'm hoping you can all see that. So hi, as Emma said, I'm Emily Upcott. I'm a research associate in Spatial Modelling and Ecology at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And I thought today I'd talk a bit about our crop map products, which are available through Adina. And I'll explain just a few of the ways in which the crop maps can be used or could be used, and share a bit about how some of my colleagues and I are currently using them in some research. So since 2015, UK CEH, in collaboration with RSAC, have been producing the UK CEH land cover plus crops maps, which is an absolute mouthful, but that's what they're called. These are field level vector crop classification data sets for Great Britain. 2020 data were released just a few months ago, and we're expecting that these maps will continue to be produced annually. Sentinel-1 radar data forms the core of what we use, while Sentinel-2 optical data help to differentiate between more difficult crop classes. And Sentinel-2 data have only been available since 2016, and that's because it was launched after the 2015 data set. In case you don't know or aren't so familiar with it, radar detects satellite produced and reflected beams, which is the image on the left, while optical data is where the satellite detects the sun's reflectance on the right. The main advantage, or one of the advantages of using Sentinel-1 radar data, is that it can see through clouds, which is understandably on a day like today very useful in Great Britain. Different textures of Earth affect the radar return signal, which allows us to differentiate between different land cover types, including different crops. There are frequent updates to these backscatter images throughout the year because crops understandably change in colour and texture throughout their growing season. And matching the time series of radar backscatter to different reference fields we use means that crops can be classified much more accurately. The resulting maps we get comprise of around 1.7 million agricultural land parcels each year. In 2015, we had 10 different crop classes, and now in 2020, we have 15. And that's not to say that we're just pulling out new land parcels each year. They're still agricultural. They were just previously in a different crop class. So for example, this year we've got spring oats, which used to be in spring wheat, and solar panels, which aren't technically a crop, but are identified as agricultural and would have been under other. These maps have several current and potential uses, from scientific research through to providing information for companies such as agribusinesses, policymakers, and utility or service companies, for example. By collating the crop maps through the years, we open many possibilities for research, especially into change, like Clare has just talked about for land cover. So we can explore cropping patterns in not just in space, but also in time, at a range of different scales throughout Great Britain. We can also incorporate additional data sets. So for example, regional, weather and climate, hydrology, landforms, economy, and wildlife survey data. And this broadens the range of research interests that this could apply to. So for instance, the more obvious end from agriculture and ecology, but through to economy and policy making. So some of my colleagues and I are currently working on harnessing crop sequence data, like I've got here, to understand crop rotations and see how accurately we can predict future crops based on the data we have. So in this presentation, I thought I'd share a few examples of crop patterns that I've explored, and also introduce you to this crop rotation research. So firstly, looking at cropping stability, these maps are showing changes in individual crops between 2015 and 2019 on a 10-kilometre grid cell scale. So I calculated correlation coefficients to see what changes in crop coverage were taking place and where. I'm not sure if you can see all the colours that well on your screens, but I'll explain it anyway. So the first map on the left, we've got spring barley, which has quite a wide range and seems to be increasing across much of it. Likewise, maize in the second one seems to be increasing in general. The third one is oilseed rape, which seems to be decreasing quite a lot through its core, its central range. And you might not be able to see it, but there are some cells towards the edge of its range where it does seem to be increasing. And finally, winter wheat, we can see it's got quite a mix of increase and decrease, but if we were to talk about it more generally, I suppose we could say there's perhaps more of a northward shift in its range. So data like this on crop area and distribution change could be useful in exploring crop-specific impacts on the environment. Secondly, I've looked at rotational diversity. So by this, I mean the diversity of different 5-year rotations. I suppose, strictly speaking, I'm actually talking about crop sequences and assuming that there's rotation. And we widely recognise that intensive farming practices like monoculture and short rotations are quite detrimental to wildlife habitats and ecosystem services. And research seems to be showing that longer and more diverse crop rotations can bring environmental as well as agricultural benefits. So we've got rotation richness on the left, and that's the number of unique rotations or sequences per 10-kilometre cell. And on the right, we've got rotation diversity, which seems to show quite a similar pattern, though perhaps because it's including the evenness of area of these rotations, it seems to be accentuating the difference between high and low diversity. But in both of them, we see that richness and diversity are higher in the east of Great Britain, which is typically higher grade agricultural land. And likewise, these data and results could be useful for investigating impacts of different crop rotation patterns or groups of them on the environment as well. Thirdly, I've looked at soil erosion, particularly with maize, and maize is a crop that's quite especially prone to erosion, and that's because the soil for much of its growing season is exposed, so to rainfall and to wind, and also with its harvesting date, that tends to be quite late in the year, and by that point it can be quite wet, which can it can increase surface runoff and silting and flood risk as well. For these maps, I've also pulled data from the European Soil Data Centre. They've got various data sets for things, so I've pulled out the water and wind erosion data sets and put that together with the maize correlation coefficient of change that I showed you before to look at soil erosion risk change. So on the left, we've got soil erosion, and perhaps understandably, we can see that that's higher in the more peaty soils of Scotland, also the Lake District. And again, it's maybe a bit faint on your screens, but slightly higher in parts of the fens of East England and Wales as well. When we look at the change of maize erosion risk, we can see that it looks different to the first map. So we've got quite an upward change in the Fenland area again, also parts of southwest England and the England-Wales border. And understanding where soil erosion risk might have a greater impact, or could if patterns were to continue to change in the same way, that could be useful in for example, more efficient targeting of flood risk management. So moving on to some research I'm currently working on with Pete Henrys, Susan Jarvis, John Redhead and Richard Pywell at UKCEH. We're looking at understanding and predicting crop rotation patterns. And by rotations, in this sense, I mean where crop sequences are cycling. So for instance, here I've been using 5 years of data, which we can look at 3 and 4 year rotations because we can pick up where that's coming to cycle back within the 5 years. These graphs are looking at the most abundant rotations by total area as well as total number of plots for these rotation types. I've taken out where it's just grass only for every rotation because that is the dominant rotation type and it means you can't see any other pattern of change. And again, I'm not sure if you can see it on your screen, but we've got winter cereals and grassland and oilseed rape appearing quite a lot in these top rotations. And then in 3 year rotations, which there are fewer of, we can see that maize is creeping in as well. I don't have an image of it because there are quite a lot of them, but the least abundant rotations are much more mixed and less winter cereal heavy. Rotations occupying just a single plot in Great Britain count for between 1/6 and 1/8 of all unique rotations, but account for far less than 1% of the total area. To investigate accuracy of using rotational sequences to predict the next year's crop, we're using a series of transition probability matrices. And in this, we're producing a model framework, which we can bring in different spatial elements so that, well, we hypothesize that this would improve prediction accuracy. And so far in our findings, the approaches that we see resulting in higher prediction accuracies are firstly where grass-only rotations are included. As I've just mentioned, grass only forms the majority of area and number of land parcels, which introduces quite heavy bias. So we've gone through this work, both including and excluding it. Also, including spatial elements is coming out as more accurate. So using 10-kilometer grid cells is quite high. Then spatial smoothing using Gaussian kernels, and then using the 2007 ITE land classification system. Longer rotation lengths are also coming out as more accurate than shorter ones. So 4 year is higher than 3. And as we're still looking into this, we're not formulating conclusions on it just yet, but perhaps this is because there's less data to validate it against for 4 years than 3. And so that's lending it to being more accurate, supposedly. Also using the more recent 3 year rotations is coming out as more accurate as any 3 year, which is quite interesting. And so overall, what we've been looking at so far, this is showing us that locality in not just space, but also time are both important in making accurate crop predictions. So that was just a whistle-stop tour of some of the exploration through the crop map I've been doing. I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. That is fascinating. It's quite incredible how much you can draw from what look like simple coloured polygons. Yeah. It's quite a detailed data set, isn't it? I think we have 2 questions if you're happy for them, and I have one of my own, if that's okay. Yeah. Our first question is, can this be used for forestry crops?
For forestry crops? So far, we're just looking at arable and grassland. It would be really interesting to include forestry crops. I suppose, yeah, the ones we're looking at are mostly annual crops rather than perennial. So that's one thing. I suppose that's one thing we could look into producing later. I think there's, I don't dabble in Earth observation myself, so it's not my area of expertise, but it's something I could ask about.
Perhaps my own question crops up here then. We were asked not that long ago how you gather the information about crops that are planted, two different crops that are planted in the same area each year. So you might have, I'm not a crop expert, you'd have one crop planted in the spring and harvested in August, and then the second one planted late August and then carries through until the next spring. Do you capture that dual purpose of the land in a single year?
Not at the moment. I have discussed recently the sort of the thought of maybe getting like cover crops and things included as well. It's just covering like the main crop, what would be a main crop in a year.
Yeah. I was thinking that if you were going to look into the forestry thing, then maybe doing it twice a year might make a difference in that, because you'd get some with leaves and some without leaves, depending what point in the year you do it. Yeah, it's very interesting. Our next question, and I'm very conscious of time, sorry for rushing this a little. Our next question is whether this is a DTM or DSM. I'm not sure does that make sense to you?
It's neither. It's a vector data set.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Parcels.
Yes, so it's based on the OS master map, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's not LiDAR. It's
Yeah. Okay, I think that answers that question. Next one, what is the resolution of the data? You're using 10 kilometre squares to do the analysis, but is that what you'd regard as the resolution of it?
No, that's just purely for me being able to show data. So it's for each land parcel, so each individual field. And then even in a field, if you've got two different crop types, it splits it up to, so I think we map from 2 hectare plots upwards.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So it does follow the OS master map boundaries effectively, yeah, okay. Next one, will silviculture, I don't know that word, silviculture / companion planting start to cause issues in future?
So silviculture is trees.
Trees, I thought that was right.
Going by Latin.
Yes, mine too.
Sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Will it start to cause issues in future where you mix things up, so the companion planting idea that crops
perhaps I think perhaps where it's on a smaller scale, it's not going to affect the data as much. Maybe if it's more widespread, it might introduce more confusion in differentiating between crop classes. But we do have this class called other, which seems to encompass quite a few different things where textures aren't quite able to meet up with a class type.
We did have a little giggle about the solar farms idea. We thought that was interesting, but it's absolutely valid. You see some vast areas covered in solar panels. So it's agribusiness, I suppose, in a way. That's the idea. Quickly scan more questions. Are floodplains classified under grassland, or are they separate?
That's a good question. So I think it confuses me a bit, because it takes essentially from the land cover map, it takes the agriculture parcels, but I'm not sure if it takes some of the grass ones or all of the grass ones as well.
Okay.
So it's a bit tricky. So it's firstly, how the land cover map identifies it, and then from that we work out texture. If it's something like the floodplain is used as meadow or sort of grass lays, then it would pop up in here, yes.
I was going to say, I would expect floodplain is a sort of geomorphological feature rather than a land cover or land use feature, isn't it? You could use you could build on a floodplain, couldn't you? That would have its own consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Very last question then, and we're going to have to wrap up in just a minute. Do you assign any uncertainty to the classifications of the crop type? For example, a probabilistic degree of membership?
Yes, so if you have a look at the website, which, I'll just say, if you look at CEH crops, and then it will probably take you to the right page, there is a link that can show you an example of how the accuracy varies for different crop types for a year. And so, yeah, they're validated each year using these reference fields. And yeah, so crops that you get quite commonly are coming out as more accurate because there's more of them and it's just easier that way.
No, that's great. Thank you. Fantastic. Right, we will have to wrap up now, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, Emily. That was very interesting, and Claire too. Thank you for your time. I'm conscious we have skipped over a few questions simply because we're running out of time. We will get back to everybody with answers to those where we can, and the transcript of the chat here, and a recording of this session with the slides in it, so everybody can have another look at it all. There's certainly some things early on that I didn't quite catch. I'd like to digest a bit further. We will hold some more of these sessions, so keep an eye out for other ones coming up. Claire and Emily, thank you very much for your time. It's fabulous to have you with us, and we're really delighted that you could give us a session like this. It's been really good.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good day.
Cheers.